Welcome back to Brutally Benevolent. I'm your host, Jordan Blades. I am sorry I'm a couple days late recording this. My kids got colds. It's like they hear the word school and all of a sudden they're sick. And probably all the other kids in the school, same thing happens. So when they all get together and they go back, they can mix their germs together in this little petri dish we call elementary school, and then they bring it home to us. It's great. Then on top of that, I had a little stomach thing that I'll talk more about in a second, but welcome back, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm hopeful that I will continue to get these episodes out more frequently, especially given the fact that my one kid started back in school today and the other next week. So I guarantee parents are equally as excited for the start of school as teachers are for the end of school. So I wanted to start today by asking you if you've ever done anything stupid. It's a rhetorical question, obviously, because you can't answer me. But even if you could, I'm sure the answer is yes. And we all have examples of varying degrees of stupid things that we've done. And you might have asked yourself after you did something stupid, why did I do that? I definitely have done that more than once. A couple of examples from my life. When I was 16, I somehow convinced my parents to finance a brand new car for me. And my brother, he was 2 years older than me. He got a hand-me-down car. And my mom got a new car when he got hers. And so, there were no more hand-me-downs in the garage. And so I ended up getting this new car. It wasn't extravagant. It was a little tiny two-door Ford Escort. But anyway, that's not the stupid thing. It was stupid. But when one day my brother and I are driving home at the same time, and we're almost to our house, we're on these kind of windy roads approaching our house. And of course, we're idiot teenagers. And so we're racing. And I hit some gravel. I think it was spring, and it snows in Colorado, so there was still gravel on the road. And I hit some gravel and went off the side of the road. Nothing. I didn't think it was a big deal at the time. I got out and looked at my car, and there was this little gap between the hood and the front quarter panel, maybe a quarter inch, maybe a half inch or something. And I thought that the hood got bent. The hinges that hold the hood on, somehow the hood just shifted to one side a little bit. So I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Drove home, took my car to the mechanic sometime later, and found out that it wasn't the hood that was bent. I had bent the entire frame of the front of my car. That is a big deal. That's a lot of labor to fix something like that. Even though it's just this tiny amount, it's not a small mistake. So obviously, you're sitting there after something like that, and you think, why did I have to race? Why did that happen? Obviously, it happened because of the gravel, but why did I feel the need why was I motivated to do that? Another example, just real quick, going back to my stomach issues, I have a wicked sweet tooth, and I do pretty good. I've been on a really strict diet. I lost a ton of weight last year, and sometimes when I pull the pin, that grenade's just going off, and it starts with one thing, one little sweet thing, and then all of a sudden that's it. I just can't, no matter there's no cost benefit analysis in doing what I do. And so then, I had like 3 bags of candy. I don't know, and more. And I woke up the next day and I felt like absolute shit. I was horrible. So again, why would I do something like that? And the answer is, whatever your examples are, and these are kind of loose examples, but there's something called self-determination theory. And I mentioned at the end of the last episode that we were going to talk about it. So what is self-determination theory? In a sense, it is not in a sense. It is the leading research in human motivation. And so what does that mean? Where did self-determination theory come from? So self-determination theory has three basic components, the three core components, which are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And so let's look at just my first example of driving too fast and wrecking my car. How do autonomy, competence, and relatedness come into play when we're talking about a 16-year-old driving too fast and wrecking his car? Well, autonomy, first of all, I couldn't wait to get my license. I loved driving. I still love driving. That sense of freedom you get going out on the road and just being able, when you want something or you need something, groceries, whatever it was, I could just grab my keys, get in my car, and go. And I still get that feeling 25 years later, 25 years having a license, and I still love being behind the wheel just as much as I did back then. And so that's where autonomy comes into play. Competence, obviously, I had 6 months of driving experience with somebody else in the car. At 16, I was an expert. I could have driven in the Indy 500, right? Not really, but that's how our brains work as dumb 16-year-old kids. Not all 16-year-olds are dumb, but most of them. So I was super competent, right, behind the wheel of a car. I was invincible. There was no way anything bad was going to happen because I had driven a handful of times and I knew what I was doing. Relatedness, that comes in because I wanted to feel related to my brother. We weren't very close, and when we were younger, we're still not very close today, but I wanted to feel related to him. I wanted to feel a closeness to my brother. And it was thought for a long time that humans were more motivated by extrinsic factors than they were intrinsic factors. So extrinsic being money, sex, power. These are the things that are going to motivate us to do well at work. Hopefully your boss isn't motivating you with sex. That's not a good thing. But these are the things that we thought motivated people more were material possessions and things like that, and power, and having a sense of being a manager and having people work for you, right? These were motivating factors. One day you're going to work hard enough and you're going to get to be the boss. Well, it turns out that intrinsic motivators are much more compelling for people in terms of what motivates us. So in the 1970s, a psychologist by the name of Dr. Edward Deci, he was working at the University of Rochester. And he started off by doing experiments, just testing, exploring intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators, right? And the early experiments proved that intrinsic motivators were definitely more powerful. In fact, if there was something that was already intrinsically motivating, and you added an extrinsic motivator on top of it, it would decrease the amount of motivation, decrease the amount of intrinsic motivation that somebody felt towards that particular goal. And that's something that they called the over-justification effect. And let me give you an example. So let's say that there is a child, right, who loves reading. They're motivated to read. They're reading books all the time, regularly. So they have this intrinsic motivation. And mom and dad say, "Oh, this is great. That's a wonderful behavior. We want to encourage more of that." And so they introduce something to the child. They say, "We're going to reward you for reading. Even though you already love doing it, we're going to buy you a toy every time you read 10 books." Over time, what is possible is that the child is they're going to be reading to get toys instead of reading because they love to read. And then down the road, kid has too many toys, and mom and dad now take that reward away. Yeah, you loved reading before. This is great. We developed a good foundation. Now we're going to remove this reward. It's highly likely that the child will not read anymore because they were reading for toys instead of reading for their love of reading or reading for enjoyment. So self-determination theory is particularly relevant when considering how to motivate behavior in students in education, employees in the workplace, and even in personal growth. It's definitely valuable in the discussion of understanding human motivation and also the pitfalls of relying too heavily on external rewards. So self-determination theory is centered around the understanding of human motivation and its need to be, it's how it's driven by self-gain and fulfillment, right? So these needs, autonomy, competence, and relatedness, are innate universal needs, and they form the basis of the theory of this self-determination theory. So in the early days, Edward Deci's research primarily focused on studying the differences between intrinsic and extrinsic motivating factors. Richard Ryan, another psychologist who worked at the University of Rochester in the 1970s, started partnering with Edward Deci, and he contributed greatly to the practical applications of self-determination theory, particularly in areas of vitality, well-being, sports, education, and in the workplace, right? So if you've ever taken a personality test to get hired for a job, it's probably thanks to those guys, because corporations want to know what is going to motivate these employees. They also want to know who's a free thinker and who's going to toe the company line, right? They don't want you if you're a free thinker. They want somebody who thinks inside the box because they created the box and the box is perfect. There's no reason to think outside the box, right? So I briefly want to take a look at these three components of self-determination theory one at a time. The first being autonomy, which for me, in terms of motivating factors, autonomy is probably the most important thing to me. I like to feel competent. I like to feel related to people and have those connections, but autonomy is really important to me. So what is the psychological impact of autonomy in motivation? Well, increased engagement is one for sure. Autonomy motivates by, it's involved in being provided activities that are inherently self-satisfying, right? Those are the things that we're going to want to do more. And it's a shame because sometimes we look at certain things where you do something as a hobby because you love it, and then when your hobby and your love becomes work, and then you get all this compounded stress of invoices and trying to grow business and how do I get more customers, and you think to yourself, I used to love just baking a cake in my kitchen, and now I've got all these orders and I've got employees to manage, and all of a sudden your love becomes less of a love. And I think part of that, in my opinion, is you've removed some of the autonomy. Now you're doing it because you have to, because somebody came in and ordered a cake. Whereas before you were doing it out of your kitchen and a friend's kid had a birthday and you just made him a really cool cake because you wanted to. So that can be very motivating, right? Doing it for yourself as opposed to doing it because there's a separate outcome that's not for you. Another psychological impact of autonomy can be enhanced performance, right? Studies have consistently shown that autonomy in work and learning environments improves performance. Study after study shows this. Autonomy also improves our well-being because it's a crucial factor in stress. Um, Having autonomy shows a reduced amount of stress. Excuse me. And a lower rate of burnout, and because you have more personal satisfaction and fulfillment. Of course, nothing is not without its caveats, so there are challenges. Certain levels of autonomy or certain situations can lead to feelings of isolation, being overwhelmed. For example, if a person's not prepared for the task at hand, but they're expected to do it autonomously, that can lead to an enormous amount of cortisol production and anxiety, stress. Which takes us to our next piece of the pie, competence, right? And having the tools that you need to be able to do something with confidence is really important. So if you're unprepared and you can't show mastery in a particular task, you lack competence. So what are the psychological effects of competence? I think we're going to see a lot of overlap in all of these, and that's why they're important to stack them, because they all definitely work together. But we see somebody who's competent has enhanced self-efficiency, which is your belief in your own capabilities to achieve a particular outcome. Greatly increased intrinsic motivation when you feel competent at something. Of course, you're more likely to fully engage when you're feeling competent as opposed to feeling unsure of yourself. And stacking that with autonomy, you're more engaged for intrinsic reasons as opposed to doing it for somebody else or just because you were told to. Competence is great for our emotional well-being. No one likes to feel like a failure or to feel like they've failed. And I think there's a big difference in feeling like a failure and knowing that something failed. My wife has to remind me constantly when things aren't going well in my life or when things don't work out the way I had planned and I feel like a failure. The world's a lot of the most successful people in the world for the entirety of human history, I'm sure, failed many times before they got it right. The guy that discovered fire, or the woman that discovered fire, they didn't make a little pile of dried leaves and grab the first two rocks that they found and strike them together and just make a fire. I mean, they had no idea. Who knows how that went down? But the point is, people have failed sometimes miserably at many, many things. And the point is just looking past that. The idea is to look past that and find what you're competent at. And just because something failed doesn't mean you weren't competent at it. It just means it didn't work out. Maybe it wasn't the right time, it wasn't the right place, but it's not on you. I really struggled with that as a small business owner. My self-worth was very much tied to the business that I owned, and if it wasn't doing well, I wasn't doing well. I was miserable, and I had some really dark times when the store was doing not good. And something happened that I'm sure I'll talk about at some point during the course of this podcast, but there was a conversation I had with somebody that I still don't know exactly what it was, but the moment that I had this conversation, by the time I hung up the phone, my self-worth was totally separated from my business. My business can fail without me being a failure, and I think that's really important. That was a really difficult lesson for me to learn. And when we're more competent, just going back to our mental well-being, when we're more competent, we're more resilient to stress, right? Competence is a powerful motivator, but it's important to manage it properly. Just like autonomy, it can have its challenges. It's not without its caveats. Putting an overemphasis on performance can lead to increased stress and anxiety. When you've done really well in the past, and for some reason you're not living up to those standards that you set, but your boss or your teacher expects you to. So particularly in the realm of grades, sales goals, things like that, when there's an overemphasis placed on competence, it can have a very adverse effect. So it's important to give constructive feedback that focuses on improvement rather than criticism that is purely discouraging. So that emphasis on improvement can help develop a healthy sense of competence without making somebody feel like they failed at a task. And lack in competence, I think we see very similarly to lack in autonomy, or the wrong type of autonomy, right? Or not being given the tools that you need to succeed can lead to isolation, anxiety, stress. And that brings us to the final piece of this pie, which is relatedness, right? If you're feeling isolated, you're definitely not feeling related. So how does relatedness motivate us? How does it benefit us psychologically? Well, first of all, that social connection is super important. Feeling connected to other people, it really fulfills the basic needs that are security and belonging, and that equates to just a higher level of general happiness. We're also motivation and engagement. Again, we see another familiar topic there in terms of the psychological effects. So feeling related can help you feel more engaged, and it can be more motivating, obviously, because that's what we're talking about. And feeling like you are a part of a group or a community, you are more likely to contribute positively to that particular group's goals, rather than I don't know. I was always, when I was super vindictive, and I never did anything bad, but not being included in something made me either want to see whatever it was fail, or possibly contribute to the failure of it, because I wasn't included. And so being included and feeling that sense of relatedness can help you contribute more positively to the group's goals. And again, we see that relatedness is really important to our mental health. Strong social connections are very often associated with a reduced risk of mental health conditions such as depression and anxiety. How it's so hard when we have something on our chest that we really need to talk about, and when you feel like there's nobody you can talk to about it. First of all, that problem just grows and grows inside of your head, and it becomes a much bigger deal than what it really is. And feeling that relatedness provides much needed emotional support in particularly challenging times. And of course, just like autonomy and competence, there are challenges with relatedness. Going back to talking about being part of a group, certain groups can present as if they have a lack of respect for individual differences, when you're not part of that group, right? Think about, again, cliques in school or perhaps social groups at work that may not be inclusive of everyone. A great example is Michael in The Office when he's not invited to Jim's party. Michael was Michael, but, obvious in that episode, increased stress for him, right? Wanting to know where everybody was going, what everybody was doing, why he wasn't invited. Or think about Ross in Friends being the last to know about Chandler and Monica dating. He felt like an outsider. He felt isolated because everybody else knew except for him. And so those are just a couple of examples of how important it is for us to feel like we're a part of a group and to know what's going on and therefore be able to contribute more positively. Relatedness also has to do with boundaries, and it's super important to respect boundaries, right? Um, Especially within groups of close connections, or just one-on-one connections that we form with other people, right? It's also equally important to define your own boundaries for other people so that your boundaries can be respected, whether it's as a manager, a teacher, as an employee, making sure that your boss knows what your boundaries are. We've all seen those people at work who, I spent a long time in the restaurant industry, and so people at work who, somebody calls in sick for a shift, or or somebody is let go, something happens, and all of a sudden there's a shift that needs to be filled, and they just tell somebody, oh, you have to work. And they're not allowed to do that, obviously, but whoever it was, whoever gets told that they have to work, if they hadn't properly defined their boundaries, maybe it's a regular day off, maybe they already have too many hours or enough hours, they don't want to work any more hours. It's really important to make sure that we define those boundaries. And without social connections, that feeling of isolation sometimes, I think maybe I mentioned it a minute ago, but it's amazing how just saying something out loud to someone we're close to and getting something off of our chest, this big problem becomes much more manageable when we talk about it out loud, right? And so it's important that we have those people in our lives to share those difficulties with. I definitely find all these to be true. I'm a rare person in that I'm both an introvert and an extrovert, and so I need time alone. I need a lot of time to myself, but I also relish human interaction. I need to get out and just go see people, talk to people, say hi, and feel relatedness to people. Competence, we all know that feeling of, whether it's doing something in your yard, doing some work on your house, completing a small project. When you started from nothing or something was broken and you fixed it, seeing your work at the end of that is always a super rewarding experience. Do I say super too much? I think maybe I do. I'm just noticing that. Anyway, that feeling of competence when you've completed something on your own is great. And there we go, autonomy again. And we've got all three. So I know for me, these all hold to be very true. I'm highly motivated by autonomy. I love to feel competent, and I waited tables for 20 years because I was good at it. And, I just never, it was always depending on how busy you were, or I changed restaurants a lot. I worked at a lot of different places in 20 years. So there's always that challenge of learning the new restaurant, getting to know the people you're working with and stuff like that. But I find all three of these factors to be very true in my life in terms of how I'm motivated. So I'm curious, as you look back and we talk about some of these things and giving examples of doing stupid things, what are some moments in your life that you look back on and you say, why did I do that? And so I'd love to hear what those things are. Perhaps there's a project that you did in the past with a group, or by yourself, whatever, that you feel didn't go very well, and you think it could have been more successful if you had been properly motivated and given the right tools to do it. If you were set up for success and you felt competent and you felt a sense of autonomy, could things have gone better in whatever that project was? I also think it's important to look at these events from the past and learn from them, but not dwell on them. I don't believe in regret. It's a real thing. You can't not believe in something that actually exists. But I just think regret is a huge waste of time, because we can't change the past. It's a lesson that we learn from. It's like Jerry Seinfeld says about pain. Pain is a gap in knowledge, right? So you stub your toe on the foot of your bed, and pain comes rushing in to fill that gap in knowledge. I mean, think about it. How often do you stub your toe on the same piece of furniture more than once or regularly, right? That's a gap in knowledge. We momentarily forgot, or we didn't realize something was there, or it was that close to the edge. We stub our toe, and it rarely happens again, right? So mistakes of the past are equivalent to pain. Sometimes you might have experienced pain because of your mistakes in the past. Maybe you did. But it's something rushing in. I think reminiscing on the past and thinking about mistakes or failures in the past is knowledge rushing in to fill a gap so that you can do better moving forward, right? So I'm curious, what are some of the things that you've done in the past? How are you motivated? And when you look at how you relate to your students, if you're a teacher, or your employees, how are you using self-determination theory to motivate them? Are you already doing it, or maybe it's something that could be done better? I don't know. I'm curious. So when you're looking at the future, your plans, are you going to be motivated by money and being rewarded for the work that you do with, I don't know, I guess more vacation time could be considered an intrinsic reward. It's something you get to do for yourself. I don't know. But there's, I didn't mention this, and I wanted to. There's a great book by a gentleman named Stephen Kotler. It's called The Art of Impossible. If you've ever talked to me in person, there's a good chance that I've mentioned this book. It's a phenomenal book. And he talks about how there's research that shows that people are only motivated by money up to a certain point. He goes through the evolutionary history of our motivation. We're, from an evolutionary standpoint, we're motivated by obtaining more resources so that we have enough for ourselves and our family. And then beyond that, we need enough resources to try to help the community. And there's that sense of relatedness. And beyond that, money can only motivate so much. And we're more motivated by the autonomy. And this might seem out of place at the end because I forgot to mention it while I was talking. But there are examples in the corporate world, highly successful companies who have proven that the autonomy works and they've benefited greatly from it. A couple examples are Google. They have what they call 20% time. So their software engineers can spend 20% of their time on the clock working on their own kind of passion projects. And some of Google's, if not all of Google's, most profitable products have come from that 20% time. Gmail, Google Maps, there's a whole list. 3M is another company that does it. They started, and the Google thing, their 20% time seemed like a new age kind of idea when they started it 20 years ago. But 3M started doing it in the 60s. They had what they called 15% time. And their engineers were allowed to pursue their own projects for 15% of the time. Of course, they're on the clock, so the intellectual property that they're working on belongs to the company, but it's not something they're told that they have to work on. It's just, they have this idea and they can run with it. And a great example from 3M is Post-it notes, which I can't remember the exact number. Post-it notes generate, I think it's $1 billion, maybe $3 billion, $1 billion a year in revenue. It's crazy. And that was developed in an engineer's free time, just coming up with something. I wonder if he was trying to think of ideas, what to come up with. And he said, I wish I could just stick these ideas all over my computer screen or my desk. I don't know. And then the last example is Patagonia. And I love this. I recently founded another company, and my partner who founded it with me, he and I had this discussion, and this is very much the way that we want to operate our business. And I'll talk more about this business in the future. But Patagonia has no set work times, right? You work on your schedule, which is brilliant because everybody's circadian rhythm is different. Some people, Stephen Kotler, he mentions in his book, he gets up at 4 a.m. and that's when he does some of his best writing. Not everybody wants to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Some people want to stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning and then get up at noon. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we're all forced into this societal concept of time and when work has to be done. And it makes sense to a certain extent. If everybody's at work at the same time, people answer emails, whatever, who cares? But it just makes so much sense to not have, as long as you get your work done, who cares what time you come into the office or what time you go home? Why would that only matters to people who want, to be looking over somebody else's shoulder. The other thing that Patagonia does, I think they have a name for it, but their offices are in California, and they have these windows that look right out into the ocean. And anytime the surf is good, they drop what they're doing and everybody grabs a surfboard and they go surfing. I don't think it's mandatory, but it's, the owner started it, the owner of Patagonia, because he would look out the window and see great surf conditions and he wanted to go surf. And now his employees get to benefit from that. And it's probably something that they'll do forever. But when employees are happier and they have these things to motivate them, how much harder would you work if you could work on your own schedule at using your own circadian rhythm rather than having to, if your rhythm doesn't fit the 9 to 5 or whatever, you're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole, right? So if you didn't have to fit your round peg into a square hole, how much happier would you be? How much harder would you work? How much more competent would you feel? How much more productive would you be? I'm curious. But that's it. That's my time. I am curious to hear your thoughts. I'm now that the kids are going back to school, we'll be much more active on social media. And so find me on Twitter. There should be links wherever you are listening to your podcast. But Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, obviously. Leave your comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. But thanks so much for joining me. I really love researching these topics. I think I said that last time. And I'm just going to keep putting these out there because I love doing this. So thanks so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.